Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast. You are here for the 2020 Servant Leaders Series, and I really appreciate you being with us. Today we have a guest in studio that is a guy that I've known for about 10 years since I got into the, quote, leadership game as a consultant and a coach. In fact, the very first time we met, it was at a network meeting. And I stood up and said, I am a newly minted John Maxwell coach. I haven't even been to the training yet. And this guy stands up. I'd never seen him at this meeting before. And he goes, no, I'm a John Maxwell coach. And I have already been to the training. And I went, what? And so we became fast friends. We've been cohorts since then. We've done training together. We've done events together. But he is way further down the road than me as far as accomplishments in life and things that he has successfully done and completed and retired more than once, and then still just refuses to retire, refuses to quit. And so he's still investing himself in a lot of different organizations, but I'll let him tell you about those. Please help me welcome Jim Gardner. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Thank you, Loren.
Very much appreciate you.
Absolutely, and it has been a wonderful friendship and brotherhood, I think, is what I would even call it. And I don't think I would classify myself as being further down the road. Just as we were setting up here, I'm still, inspired and, admire you for all the technical experience that you have in putting things like this together. So, not necessarily the same tracks, but I consider you to be equally as accomplished.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to take this conversation. I mean, it's interview, you can call it that. It's a conversation. It's a collaboration as much as anything else, because I really believe that the conversations around leadership are few and far between. We know that John Maxwell recently has pulled together the John Maxwell team with the John Maxwell Company, with Equip, with Minutes with Maxwell, and a lot of these organizations are rising to a whole nother level with huge goals and huge targets of global impact. And we've both been along for the ride from that since the very beginning as founding partners. But we've also seen a lot of evolution, and we've also seen a lot of people try to play the Me Too game. And by Me Too, I don't mean the social media campaign of, I've been assaulted, but the I want to be like you kind of game where they run alongside, they want to start a coaching organization, or they want to make a global impact, and it fizzles out at some point. I think it was Steve Siebold that I heard say, it's one thing to have a great speech. It's another thing to have world-class content. And so when we talk about world-class content, the Maxwell team obviously has world-class content. John Maxwell is a world-class leader. But bringing that from that world-class content, whether it's speaking from the stage or coaching with a group, down to the brass tacks of everyday relationships. Those employees that don't want to listen, the toxic people in your life, the relationships that you have to deal with every day who think they know what leadership is, and they're clueless. And so I'm really working hard to, as a filter for the relationships and the conversations that I have, bring this balanced wheel of leadership into this conversation and talk about authority and respect, influence and impact, and then transformation, which is woven together with story. So I'd like to talk about your experiences in the executive level, in the C-suite of major top Fortune companies, I believe Fortune 100, both of them, if I'm not mistaken.
Few, yeah.
And so the being in there, that view of the world is a little different when we talk about things like authority. Mm-hmm. And then being an entrepreneur, a solopreneur for the last decade or so has an entirely different look on authority. And then serving on the boards that you serve on. So tell me, what is your knee-jerk reaction to the word authority, and what's your introspective look at the word and how it applies in leadership?
Well, in my experience, most people, I think, when you use the term authority, think of a negative connotation. I think, like leadership, authority is something that we earn in a lot of ways. I mean, to be used from a positive perspective, an influential positive standpoint. So, even in the military, which, we may get into a little bit more later, it's the authority that you have by rank, but even more importantly and more powerful is the authority that you have by being able to connect with another human being and be able to influence, their behavior, possibly how they think, those kinds of things. So I think authority and leadership, really kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
How do you get authority?
Well, so you can have it by title, again, kind of like leadership, but you have to earn it, in my experience.
How do you increase it?
You increase it through trust.
Okay.
And I think that's really the bottom line. So, you start off and you have authority by title, potentially by rank, possibly, and then, or even if you're a classroom teacher, you have authority, in the classroom. But we've all gone through the educational process, maybe still going through it in some cases. But the authority to command someone to do a lesson is one thing, but then being a teacher to where you influence a student to want to dive in, to want to learn more, to come to you as not just a person of authority that's telling me what to do, but someone that I recognize and respect because of the knowledge and the wisdom that they have to be able to learn from them. And so that authority is really what I'm talking about. So even in the context of the corporate world, someone who has authority, but it's something that is, like we said, earned, and the more that I tighten that bond between myself and that individual, then the deeper the trust becomes.
I find that authority has a lot to do with who you submit to.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in that area, the more that I have a relationship of authority with someone, again, outside of the title, if you will, and like I just said, the more the trust builds, so the more submissive I'm then willing to be based on that trust.
Would you agree with this statement that if you want to see authority grow in your life, give it away?
Oh, absolutely.
I find that with a lot of relationships, it's that John says it in a lot of different capacities, but John Maxwell says, don't be a river, be a reservoir. Or,
Right.
excuse me, don't be a reservoir, be a river. Let it pass through. Right. And I find that authority is one of those things that you don't have any if you haven't received it from somebody else. And,
Right.
and receiving it from somebody else means being submitted to that individual having authority over you. And sometimes that's not because they have a higher rank or a higher title or a bigger job, but it's that person that holds you accountable. It's that person that understands what's going on in your life. It's that person that'll call you to the carpet when you're out of line or when you're wrong. Right. And putting those things in perspective and saying, okay, I submit to your correction, I submit to your wisdom, I submit to your insights, I submit to your opinions, I want to hear them. That grows, like you said, that connection, that bond. And so it increases the authority, which means when they're ready to delegate that authority, they know that if I ask you to do this way, that's all I have to say. The rest of it's going to happen. And so that delegated authority becomes a very powerful thing. It's like my pastor not too long ago said of his pastor, he used to brag about the fact that he could stand in the middle of the highway and stop a semi-truck with one hand. And people were like, what kind of bodybuilder were you? And he's like, no, I was a DPS officer. Oh, whole different thing, right? But that is the level of authority that comes with, when you cross the line here, there's a whole lot more behind that individual than just that individual. And I think that when we think about authority, that passing up and down is a huge aspect of that.
Right. Yeah, I think using the example that you just mentioned, what crossed through my mind is there are some people who would stop with an officer in the middle of the road raising his hand because of the uniform.
Right.
And there are others who would stop because that individual is a human being. Right. And so having trust in humans as kind of a foundation and a base is, I think, what to me is truly most important. And we can get into some of that a little bit later, but I think building that authority comes from giving people the benefit of the doubt instead of the judgment. And really the ultimate failure, I think, are people who have a level of fear to where they project that they know it all. They either say it or they demonstrate it, and therefore they're not willing to be submissive in any form or fashion. And so with that, they're not going to have the relationships to be able to influence people, to be able to build that trust, to be able to build that magnitude of authority. And I see that all the time in corporations and organizations that I work in.
I wonder too how often we see a lot of challenges with authority in the public arena today. You know, whether it's fighting against the law enforcement officers or it's the lack of respect as it's carried out in the language toward our political leaders on every side, sometimes by our political leaders on every side. But if you just go to YouTube and type in "fight in the classroom," it's page after page after page after page after page of kids in the classroom fighting each other, and kids in the classroom physically in an altercation with their teacher. So the contrast over the last several decades of what does it look like to be a person of authority has completely changed. On the other hand, you see, I saw a post today that was saying, media people everywhere are looking for true experts and authorities in their topic. And I'm like, well, that's true, but anybody can raise their hand and say I'm an expert or an authority in this topic because there is no barrier to entry to make that claim.
Right.
And yet, if a teacher or a law enforcement officer or a political leader doesn't demand, author enough authority to do their job without pushback, who am I? So
Right.
how do you think that's impacted our culture and our society in the years since you started in the workforce to where you are now?
Well, it's when I started in the workforce back in the mid-'70s, there was a lot more, let's say, respect for authority, and I think that was evolutionary through the generations and so on. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have now is where do we start to try and turn that around? Do we start in the corporate world with leaders and influencing people in the organization who are adults of some generation or another, or do we start back with young kids? I think we start with both, and I think the area that probably has received the most attention as of late is more in the organizational corporate world, even with churches for that matter. I think what's missing and what's such a great opportunity that I certainly have a heart for, and I know you do as well, as an example with the mentoring that we've done at Trinity High School with Trojan Talk, but even potentially younger, and what I challenge, not getting in the weeds, I think it'll come full circle here, but what I challenge the high school kids in my classroom with is, who are you mentoring? So, each of them, we all have our story. We all have challenges, and, we can talk about this a little deeper later on as well. We all, in my experience, have a element of PTS, post-traumatic stress, based on events that have occurred in our life. I don't care who you are. There is no Ozzie and Harriet that I've ever met.
To some degree, you're going to be dealing with that, and some to the level of disorder, and some just how do I deal with toxic people?
Well, and I have taken off one of the organizations I work with have taken off the D. It is so pervasive. It's no longer a disorder because everybody has it, right?
I think there may still be a level of it, or an intensity of it, a magnitude of it, that makes it a disorder where they can't cope with things in life, and they really need mental health therapy to some degree. But I'll leave that to the experts like Caroline Leaf. But I don't disagree with you that everybody has post-traumatic stress.
Right.
And our world just dumps more stress on us daily.
Right. But to counter a little bit with what you just said, I think even going back to young kids, that's the problem. They don't recognize it, so therefore they can't acknowledge it, and therefore they can't work with it. So
the level of awareness makes it a boogeyman, if you will,
right.
because it's it's not obsolete, but it is obscure.
Right. And what happens is that continues to manifest and build through life. And then we wonder, once somebody becomes an adult, or maybe even in high school or junior high, whatever the case may be, why is this person behaving this way? And if you peel back the onion, then I would say that a very high percentage of the time it comes back to some type of trauma that they have dealt with already in their life. And so everything kind of ties back to that. Now, can we all be therapists and remove that? No, I don't think so. But I think what we can do with young people is for those of us who feel like, we have some perspective from a positive standpoint, is to be able to share with young people what the perspective could be, what the possibilities could be, and therefore not to feel that they are isolated in some of the challenges that they deal with, but to let them know that some of the ways that they're behaving, some of the ways that they're feeling, because feelings have the influence on behavior, really come from something of substance, and that it's okay. The behavior may not be okay, but it's okay that you have those feelings based on what happened. So giving them that perspective, something to be aware of and then start dealing with. And then how do you do that? That's where I feel like I have ownership to do as much as I possibly can to be able to be a mentor to whoever it may be, to be able to share my perspective based on my experience, based on traumas that I've had, and nowhere close to being perfect, nowhere close to having those things sorted out, but I do feel like I've got some beneficial, potentially influencing perspective to be able to share with others, to let them know they're not in the boat by themselves, to let them know what the possibilities are by looking at their feelings, understanding them, and starting to change them, right?
Well, and I think the awareness that the event has an impact, awareness that feelings often drive the way you think.
Right.
I call that attitude. Awareness that you don't have to be a victim of it. That, whether it's a toxic environment or it's toxic people or it's just a memory, that when it comes up, you don't have to respond the way that moment, environment, individual is egging you on to respond. You have complete control of the way you respond.
Right.
And so easily said, not so easily done. And it is a learned discipline and at every level. Right. It's one thing to say, I really love chocolate cake, I could eat 3 of them. Another thing to say, I really love chocolate cake, I'll have a slice or I'll have a bite. That's a discipline of saying, there's a situation that is a stimulus, I have a decision to make, and then how I actually respond to that decision is based not on the stimulus, but on my choices.
Right.
Well, there is no difference in that exact scenario than there is the anger or the frustration of someone who's prodding you and poking you and trying to get you to respond, but it's a different level of intensity. And when the trauma comes up again, when the event comes up again, when the memory of the event comes up again, and all the emotional chemicals in your body are responding as if it's happening now, then again, it's not that that event has control of you, but you have to find the place where you take control, and you by choice exhibit control over that event, that process, that memory, that individual.
Right. Well, and you just used a term which I think, can help people have that perspective. To me, there's a difference between reacting and responding, and it's a level of what I call emotional intelligence. By nature, because of fight or flight, we tend to react to the situation, to the individual, to whatever's going on, whoever's saying it, and not to get down another rabbit trail, but that's where becoming offended comes into play, and then that manifests itself in a negative way. So being able to, and this is what I work with my clients on, is being able to give yourself space to back up. We used to call it timeout with our kids, but it's kind of the same concept. And a tool, that I use with my clients is what I call Breathe 21. And so it's understanding the power and importance of deep breathing to be able to clear your head a little bit, but also to calm, that nervous system down a little bit.
Shut down that cortisol a little bit, shut down that adrenaline a little bit,
right.
Bring it all back into register.
Right. So the way the process works that I prescribe is 60 seconds, you take 4 to 6 deep cleansing breaths, and we'll get into all the details here, but then that kind of resets your nervous system. Then in 5 to 7 seconds, thinking about what's my vision for life, what's my purpose. Maybe I don't know what that is, but I know what makes me tick. I know what kind of makes me feel good, and capturing that as an image in your mind, and then 5 to 7 seconds, what am I grateful for today? And I don't care how challenging a situation may be that you may be currently in, as long as I can take a breath, as long as my heart beats, then to me that means there's opportunity and I'm here for a reason. So what am I grateful for? That maybe it's just that my heart is beating. Maybe it is just that I can take that breath, and recognizing that, this is preparing me for something else, something greater.
Let me be honest though, and say, how easy is it to get, especially if you're in that heated conversation. Now, if it's an email or it's a Facebook post or it's a letter that you got from your boss or the IRS or something, it's easy to lay that down for a minute, take the deep breaths, walk through that mental process, and then come back and revisit. But if you're in a conversation with someone, you just zone out for a complete minute or two and, okay, I'm good now. How do you do that practically in an engaged environment with an employee or a vendor or a customer or something like that?
So what I tell my clients to practice is, again, it's okay to take a timeout. Everybody remembers timeout. So if you're in a heated discussion, a confrontation, or whatever, that has some, relative control and therefore some relative boundaries. I mean, most people aren't going to go postal, as they used to say, in the middle of somebody's office or, even in a classroom. So it's, what? I need to process this. So give me just a minute, let me step out, whatever, and reconvene, and agree upon. We both have a common friend, Glenn Morshower. And I know that he always talks about where, sometimes if he and his wife have a challenge in the morning or whatever, then he'll say, what, this is very important to me, and I want to make sure that we talk it through and see it through and come to some, resolution, but I'm going out to audition for a film. And so will you give me the grace of being able to go do that and then come back and we'll pick it up at that point. So that may be 8, 10, 12 hours later.
Right.
But that's okay. So my point is that it's okay. You have control over saying, give me a moment. Because when I come back, I can be fully committed back to you, fully committed back to our discussion, but I will have a fresh mind and a fresher perspective. And what I was going to is that we tend to react as opposed to responding. And so instead of me continuing to react, because I've become emotional, if you will, whatever that may mean, then I can come back and I can respond, and it's going to be much more positive. Still may be a challenging conversation, but I am physically prepared, which allows me to be mentally and more emotionally prepared to work through it.
Okay, so let me take that to the next level, because I know you've played golf for years. Your daughter was pretty close to a pro at one time, and so you've seen the game. You're very familiar with it. I'm
Right.
not so familiar with it, and so I remember the very first time I actually played on a course, not putt-putt, but on a real golf course. The guy just wanted to have a conversation, wanted to chat it up, and he's like, "Hey, let's go play a round of golf." I'm like, "Sure, but I've never played a round of golf, so I'm glad to go and talk with you, but I'm no good at golf. I mean, maybe I am. I've never played, so I wouldn't know." So we got to the golf course, and he pulls out his bag, and he hands me one of his drivers. He's like, "Well, let me just see what your swing looks like." And I grabbed it, and before I started swinging, he's like, don't. Took the driver back, put it back in the bag, handed me his third 5-iron, and he said, here, you play with this. And I played from the green, or from the tee box to the green, the first 9 holes with a 5-iron, because I was so bad. There was nothing he could have done to coach me up in that period of time to keep me from damaging a valuable club. Right. And he knew that, he recognized that, because he knew all the signs of a good golfer and knew what a bad golfer looked like, and I fit the description. Let me take that one step further. The most recent fight between big MMA stuff, McGregor and Cerrone, lasted 40 seconds.
Right.
In that 40 seconds, McGregor threw at least 24 offensive strikes. The first 3 didn't look like a strike at all, but they were the ones that began the end of the fight. When we train for anything, whether it's a conversation or a sales pitch or to understand new information, there's a level of disciplined training, rehearsal and practice and rehearsal and practice. What you notice in a lot of these, whether you're talking about Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris or the guys that are fighting MMA now, or pro baseball players or pro golfers or pro basketball players, or even tennis and table tennis, ping pong, if you watch those guys, they're 15 feet from the table, but they're watching the rotation of the wrist of their opponent. They're watching how they connect with the ball and where did they pick it up, and did they scoop it and lift it, or is it going to rotate to the left when it hits the table and bounce to the left, or is it going to come dead stop and not come toward me at all and I have to rush to the table? All of those are trained responses that fit within the time of a reaction time. A pitcher throws a ball anywhere between 60 and 100 miles an hour. That means the response time, because we're only talking about 70 feet,
Right.
the response time that you have is like nil. Where that ball's going to be, how you're going to connect the bat with it, what kind of spin does it have on it, where's it going to go once it connects with the bat, is it going to pop straight up or go straight over the fence? All of those are things that are trained behaviors, trained responses in a fraction of a second. Race car drivers do the same thing. So elite level athletes discipline themselves in how to respond to a moment or react to a moment so that the response or the reaction on the back side of that doesn't require 20 minutes to decide. I've taught people for at least 20 years from a scriptural standpoint when it says take every thought captive and make it obedient. That's exactly what Scripture is looking for, is how do we, as a thought is coming in, how do we react to that? How do we respond to that? And I believe maturity is the compression of that time. If you watch a kid with a T-ball and he can't connect the ball with the bat when the ball is not moving versus a pro baseball player, exactly the same mechanics when they're done right, but the reaction time and the discipline needed to perfect that craft, that's maturity. Mm-hmm. The distance between the two. Right. It was a long definition, but would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, and that really is the foundation of what I work with people on. And to your point, I mean, I learned a lot of that through life, but also with all that my daughter went through, as a golfer, starting from day one, and looking back at things that she did, things that I've done as well. And with the example that you used with the golf club, we all have to start somewhere.
Right.
And, I mean, even if you think about it as you watch a toddler learning to walk, right? So you certainly don't just jump up and start walking one day. You don't just walk out, on a driving range or a golf course and have a swing that's going to take the ball, 260 or 300 yards down the fairway. So first of all, it's just recognizing that everything, requires discipline, requires time. And so, what I work with people on really is identifying, because most of them, that I work with are elite to begin with. But what most of them have experienced so far is the physical skills and leveraging, their God-given talents as well into those physical skills. But then taking that more into the mental and emotional preparation, which is part of what you talked about. And like anything else, that does come from discipline of repetition of proper practice. So even, talking with and working with special forces, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and so on and so forth, for them, it's a matter of life and death at some point.
Right.
But, a Navy SEAL, for example, trains for as much as, 30 plus months before they ever, see any action. And it's that daily drill. And also, to part of what you were talking about, anticipating, identifying what potentially could go wrong.
Right.
And being prepared for those things that we don't expect, right? Always expecting something, not knowing exactly what that may be, but being prepared for whatever, it might be. And so, again, even, in the corporate world or in the sports world, both of, which I work in, it's helping people understand that it's going to be something, and it's a matter of recognizing that, accepting it, and then preparing for that on a consistent basis. And one of the phrases I use a lot is, what is it that I can do today to be just that much better tomorrow? And then whatever that is, plugging it in and being intentional and having discipline around it. Because there's always opportunity. Again, kind of going back to, as long as I have a breath, as long as my heart's beating, I feel like that there's opportunity for me to grow, opportunity to become better. And I don't mean that on the field of play or anything, but better as a person. Because I have to become a better person, better who I am first, before I can do anything else. And that kind of, too, goes back to, leadership. I have to learn how to lead myself before I can ever lead anyone else.
Right.
So, that comes to family. I have to learn how to lead myself before I can lead my spouse. Even from, a spiritual perspective or a Christian perspective, I have to learn how to lead myself before I can lead my children. So that ties back into what I was talking about a moment ago with our youth. I think a lot of the problems that we have in society today are that parents have not been prepared. They don't know how to prepare. They don't know what to do to be able to be parents, to be effective parents.
That goes back to your comment earlier. If you, to grow your authority, you got to receive it from somebody, you got to give it down to somebody, but what are you doing to mentor somebody else?
Right.
And I'm convinced that there are guys who play golf, like my buddy who looked at my grip before I even swung the club and went, no, don't do that. Who, whether you're talking about relationships or you're talking about leadership, you're talking about handling a weapon as a special forces person or law enforcement, can simply look at where you've started or where you are right this minute, and from their experience, overlay that with your current position and go, okay, here's what we need to work on. A great coach can look at someone who has played baseball and in their stance go, okay, here's what you're doing wrong. I interviewed Mike Kiselak not too long ago, who played for the Dallas Cowboys with Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin, and he said, I coach these guys all the time. They're D1 college athletes. I mean, these guys are going to the pros. They're here for the draft. But while I'm coaching them, I'm noticing no one's ever taught them how to handle the football as a center. But yeah, they know how to block. They know how to follow the rules. They know how to get in the gym and work out. They do all of these things. That's awesome. But how you position your hand on the grip of the ball changes the game by a second or two. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about a guy that can run 40 yards in 4 or 5 seconds, that second or two is the difference between 20 yards to the goal line and not getting there.
Right.
And so how you handle the ball as a center changes the game by a second or two. That's the minuscule stuff that a good mentor, a good coach can say, based on my experience, I'm looking at your hand on the ball, and I understand why your punts keep getting blocked.
Right.
It's not the punter. it's the long snapper. Man, that means all the difference in the world. It's not how you swing, it's where you position your feet, whether you're a baseball player or you're a golfer or you're a tennis player. Those small mechanics up front make all the difference in the world. So here's where we get back to that crossover, and you talked about it before. Everybody has a degree of the PTS, and because everybody has a degree of it, that means we all have a story. And from that story, we all have experience. So it doesn't matter if you're 12 or 32 or 62, the experiences that you have allow you to look through a lens and say, been there, done that, let me show you how not to do that again. Let me show you how to improve that game. You watch siblings. We have 8 grandkids, and I watch the 4-year-old instructing the 2-year-old on how to get past the video ads on YouTube. When they're watching little cartoons on YouTube, he's like, no, just click here and it'll go away. And they're like, and I barely have the motor skills to touch that spot on the screen. But he's 4 and he's already mentoring them on how to get on to the next thing. So we lose a lot of that in today's culture. Everybody's so focused on social media, they don't have human interactions to the same level.
Right. Well, I want to touch on something that you just said too. And this is where I think, so many people miss out because, again, they're not aware. And even as a coach, so been there, done that. So that kind of is what gives me the credibility, if you will,
Right.
to coach other people. But what I see is oftentimes the case. Even if I'm working with a CEO client, been there, done that. Well, you know what? When I've been there, done that before, I was somebody else. I wasn't then who I am now, because I have since then, even if it was last week, gained additional experience, gained additional perspective, and am open to been there, done that, but what else can I learn about that now?
Right. I think if we ever stop learning, then we're jacked up. But
Right.
there are a lot of people, I would agree with you, that they feel like I've been there, done that, so let me only teach what I've learned before, A, or B, that makes me authority in it because I've been there and done that. And I love it. Flabbergasted me the first time I heard it. I've used it 1,000 times since then when John said practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent.
Right.
And bad practice makes permanently bad habits, and good practice makes permanently good habits. That is an enormous difference. So yes, been there, done that might mean you've got the experience that I don't have. You have some insight or some knowledge that I don't have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you've done it before, that you did it right the first time.
Right.
Or that you learned the lesson you were supposed to when you went through that before. I mean, I know there are things that I've been teaching for decades that I look back on now and go, okay, there's a better way to say that. There's a better way to teach that. I've now experienced something that I hadn't experienced when I first learned that, or I now put that into a completely different context. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe is more of a tangible, example for people who may be watching, and that is, you've seen a movie, and you watch it again, and it's like, I didn't see that the first time.
Right.
Or I know as you and I have talked, we've heard pastors talk about it as well. I've read that piece of scripture numerous times. I never read that before, right?
Or had that understanding when I read that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key. I didn't understand because I'm a different person now than I was the last time I read it. Right? So it opened that door. So my whole point with all of that is, just being open, and again, as opposed to reacting, going back to that, because I've been there, done that, or I know that because I've been there, done that, things have changed because I've changed, right? And so with some of those subtleties that I think we all have got to be aware of and respect and give authority to, when my daughter was playing, I was invested because I loved and cared about her, but my investment was to observe her with all of her other professionals that she was working with. So she had a swing coach, she had a short game coach, she had a nutritionist, she had a professional trainer, she had a sports psychologist. And so it's marrying all of those things together and doing it effectively and optimizing it so that she could, become her best. But there were so many little subtle things. So my job was to observe all of that and then observe her when she was away from, those professionals to,
See how
re-engage.
transfer.
Yeah, exactly. So as an example, we had a practice cage set up in our garage and had video to where she could practice swinging, and we would videotape and just watch what she was doing and so on and so forth. So she would swear that she was not changing anything in her swing, and I would explain to her that just by one little fraction of an inch in the way that she was gripping, or like you said, the way that she was standing was changing her swing. And so the way that I was able to show her so she could connect with it and then do something about it was on the video, to where I could actually use, a straight edge and draw a line with a marker across the screen, and it would literally maybe be a 1/16 of an inch. But that is something that would seem very subtle, shouldn't seem like it'd make a big difference, but makes a vast difference in the length of the shot that she's trying to make,
Right.
From being yards off track, right?
Right.
So going back to what you're saying, it's being aware of that and having something to look at, whether it's a coach, whether it's a video, somebody that you trust, to be able to give you that perspective, to give you that guidance to continue to practice what becomes permanent and continue to build on that, because it's never finished, even though it becomes permanent. It's
Right.
always continuing to, tweak and tune it. And
Yeah, I've now cut the tree down and I've carved a beaver out of it, but if he's going to have eyeballs, that's going to take some more detail.
Right. So, another quick example is that I'm asked, often by my clients, CEOs or other executives, to sit in on meetings. And all that I'm there for is to observe them, and things that we are practicing, again, from a, mental and even emotional perspective, that they are working to build and to make permanent in a positive way, being able to observe and capture that in some form so that I follow up with them afterwards and say, this is what happened. And
Right.
they didn't see it, right? But when I can bring it to their attention, they see what led up to it or what happened, and then they can course correct. And,
They already have their biases, they already
Right.
have their agendas in mind, they know how this is supposed to go.
Right.
And sometimes our preferential bias causes us to expect that's how it is going to go, that's how it did go, that's how we wanted to go, and that's what worked, and there we are. And we're
Right.
like, no, you have a bias that allows you to see that, but that's not what actually happened.
Right. But I think we even do that with our spouses, with our kids, with our friends.
ourselves, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Even with ourselves.
Right. So, it's just being able to have that awareness and again, submit to authority, to allow ourselves to be open enough to receive and be able to grow and continue to develop.
One of the things I'm working on right now, the ebook and the soon coming webinar, talks about how authority is a direct correlation to your name. That name and authority become synonymous. I mean, there's a big name in investment, there's a big name in clothing wear, there's a big name in automotive. If I say the name Tesla, and you think electric cars, right now they are the authority in electric car. And so there's a direct correlation between name and authority and expertise and brand. And a lot of people want to go out and use brand to create an imagery that is imaginative and it's forward thinking, but it isn't a solid brand because it doesn't line up with their existing name, their existing authority, their existing expertise. And yet when you look up authority and name, they're almost interchangeable. They're almost synonymous. And it's pretty fascinating study to me. When you think about what you make a name for yourself, how you make a name for yourself. If you're the coach for the center and you can look at a guy on the field and go, that's not the guy for your team, he's going to make your punter get blocked all the time. You're like, all he did was kneel down and grab the football, for heaven's sake. That's all I need to know. And unless he's coachable enough for me to tell him he's grabbing the football wrong, that guy's going to cost you money.
Right.
That level of brand, that level of authority, that level of expertise goes right out there beside your name to say, this is what they're good at, this is what they do, this is what they've proven results in.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting. I did a talk last Friday, actually, and we were talking about, how do we discern, people from the standpoint of whether it's hiring someone, trying to determine who our inner circle of friends might be, those kinds of things. And so one of the examples that I mentioned was that when I was in corporate, I've never been a great golfer. I've always called myself a hack. My kids were the great golfers. But one of the things that I would do in considering a prospective hire, and again, this is, at the executive level, is I would take them out to play 9 holes of golf. And, like you, there were a few who had never held a golf club in their hands. There are others who had, different levels of experience. But what I observed was, how did they lead themselves? How did they submit to authority if I made a suggestion or whatever? And again, I'm not a great golfer, but particularly in the sport of baseball, we know a lot of great managers who were never great players, right? And it's because
they're good with people, not with the game.
Right, exactly, and can translate between the two and bond the two together, right? So it was how did they submit to authority? How do they talk? How do they self-talk? How are they talking to me? How are they talking to, other people that we might be playing with? And what is their behavior coming out of that?
Right.
And
how do they respond or react to their own shots or where the ball lands?
Yeah, exactly. And, over 50% of the time, I didn't hire people based on that experience, because I knew it was going to be, the wrong direction for our organization and the wrong direction for them.
Well, and I think that goes back to what John said. John Maxwell says we tend to hire people for what they know.
Right.
We end up firing them for who they are.
Right.
If we would just hire them for who they are and realize that most of the skills we need them to know are teachable.
Right.
If you've got the right kind of teachable person with the right kind of attitude first, then train them all the skills you want to.
Right.
They're the right kind of people for that.
Yeah.
But you get to someone who's got all the talent in the world and all the skills in the world, and they're just a jerk. Who wants to work with them?
Right. Exactly. Well, and
So golf, I guess, is a good litmus test for that.
It is. And one other thing, just, for some additional perspective, you were talking about playing with the 5-iron, I think it was, with this gentleman. One of the things, again, in practicing and being prepared for whatever might happen, my daughter, we would go out and she would play an entire 18 holes, maybe once a month, whatever, with a 7-iron. So she would tee off on every hole with the 7-iron. She'd play out of the fairway, even out of the sand, and putt with the 7-iron.
Wow.
Because it was all about, okay, how can I, figure out and plan how to finesse something that may not be the appropriate tool normally, but it's the hand that I've been dealt, and still make it work.
Very good.
Yeah.
So let's move on to respect. And I do want to call out one thing that you said, because I talk about it and we'll get to it as we wrap up, but the 5 spokes of the wheel of the balance wheel of leadership, starting with authority, also presumes that the whole thing is cyclical. Not only cyclical, but it expands each time it makes a cycle. So when you start at the hub with authority, the lowest level of authority is the badge that you have, name badge, etc. But each time you make it all the way around the circle, your authority grows. And the irony that you mentioned, we all have a story, we all have mentored or been mentored, we should all mentor. That level of authority is fed by the story. And that's exactly the cycle that I talk about. We go from authority to respect to influence to impact to transformation. And transformation happens by story, but story feeds right back into increasing the next level of authority, which increases the next level of respect, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And one thing before I lose it, I just want to touch on to expand that a little bit. Not only do I share with people, who are you mentoring? And I even give that challenge. Every time I speak at Ziegler, one of the things that I cast out as homework for everyone is, who is it that you're mentoring? And it needs to be something intentional, something that's prescribed, something that's consistent. Because we all can say,
Something you make a commitment to.
Right. But we all say that we've been mentored by, whoever, let's say Jack Canfield.
Yeah.
Never met the man.
Yeah.
I've read his books, I've watched YouTube, I've watched this and that. And in that way, he is a mentor. What I'm talking about is the knee-to-knee mentoring, right? The human interaction. Because it's that wisdom, not just the knowledge, but the wisdom that you gain. And once you are poured into by whoever that may be, it's not only to help you, but it's for you to be able to then share out to those that you love and care about, right? So it's multidimensional from that perspective. But then on the other end, who is mentoring you? And, being intentional about that as well. Because it's, kind of like you were saying, with John Maxwell, don't be a reservoir, be a river. But if you don't have something that's feeding that reservoir, then you'll only be able to feed that river for so long.
Yeah, you got nothing going on.
Exactly. So again, who can you identify? And oftentimes, I challenge people, it may not even be somebody that you know today, but what's important is the journey that you travel to be able to open that door to that person, right? The people that you meet, what you learn about yourself and going through that process. And so just this past weekend, a gentleman that I've known, for a while, but not close, and he's 85 years old. And I kind of teed it up with him a little bit and asked him if he'd consider mentoring me. And it's not, again, the skills that he has, but it's the life that he's led. Right, exactly. So anyway, just wanted to...
We've all heard the phrase, like you said, that we've all been mentored, if you will. I have quite a library of books, and I've read probably 70-80% of them cover to cover. Some of them are my wife's books, and some I bought because there were some nuggets I needed out of them, but most of them I haven't read or studied cover to cover. But a lot of those people I've never met and may never meet face to face.
Right.
So there's a lot of value in reading books and getting mentorship from that. Getting the mentorship where someone can sit face to face, knee to knee, as you said, and read you, that's a whole different thing. And I only know one book that does that reads you as much as you read it. But
right, we know which one that is.
So when we move from authority to respect, I find whether you're talking the corporate world or the military or the world of professional athletes, a lot of people cannot distinguish the two.
Okay.
What do you think about that? How do you see the difference between authority and respect?
Well, I think respect starts with yourself. I think you've got to be able to respect yourself before you can respect anyone else or anything else, right? So again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with authority and kids in the classroom who are being disruptive or, creating chaos, crisis possibly, they've never been taught or exposed to what it means to respect themselves. Because I believe that if you can first respect yourself, then that's where you can start to submit to authority. But if I don't respect myself, then I'm probably not going to be able to truly respect someone else enough to be able to submit to authority.
Okay, so let's take that same thing, and I want to back up with that notion just a little bit and say, so, and I think Clint and I talked about this a little bit, taking authority in your own life as the authority of your own life is very similar to respecting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So for the person who has all kinds of excuses why they're not getting the results that they want, whether it's weight loss or it's health management or it's job management or it's the results in their business, a lot of that has to do with the fact that when they run into the problem, they have a lot of excuses rather than taking ownership or authority of that and saying, this is my fault. This is my problem. This outcome is a direct result of my choices, my behavior, my reactions, as opposed to responding to this as I should have. I just reacted and now we have this. that authority in their own life is to say, I'm going to take authority and I'm going to take responsibility, because I don't think those are even separable. I think if you don't have responsibility, you don't have authority.
Right.
And nobody's going to give you authority if you're not a responsible person. But if you don't take responsibility in your own life, then you won't have authority in your own life. Sounds like, and I've used that illustration a lot. Sounds like you're saying the same thing is true of respect, that if you don't hold your own self, your own life, your own choices, your own outcomes in high regard, then no one else will hold them in high regard, and you won't be able to hold anybody else in high regard. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, yeah. And I think that's, a challenge for a lot of people, in that they have a challenge respecting themselves because of the negativity that they have wrapped around their own story.
Because the experiences have not been framed in a way that they could be positive.
Exactly.
Okay.
And just, to cut to the chase for that, recognizing that every challenge, every fire, tribulation that you've been through, looking at that, and again, this I think comes from, perspective, looking at that as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow. What was the message in that experience, even though, it was a crisis or something that I didn't even think I was going to be able to live through, but I did. And so, being able to give some credence and some credibility to your failures that give you the strength and enable you to grow, that then is what, allows you to start to have some self-respect. If you can't ever give your failures the respect that they deserve as far as an opportunity to learn, then you're probably, in my opinion, going to be challenged to have that self-respect.
It's interesting. I'll have to do some noodling on that.
All right.
I hadn't really thought of it that way. All right, so our next phase in that wheel is influence. And, I think we both subscribe to John Maxwell's theory, influence. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. But I do also find that in order to grow influence, you have to start with the foundation of authority, meaning that you're submitted to authority and you're able to delegate it, that you've grown in respect. And again, like you, I believe that that's a pass-through. You won't have respect if you don't start with yourself. If you don't give respect to others, then no one will expect to be respected by you either, and no one will give you respect.
Mm-hmm.
You can't walk into a room and demand it. Go, you will respect me. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you can try, many have, but it doesn't work that way. But to have true influence in someone's life, a lot of people see that more as a manager, as a dictator, as a tyrant, than the person who can just step up beside you, and because you respect them, because they have authority to speak into your life, give you a small suggestion and completely change the course of where you're at.
Right.
So tell me about, from your days in the executive suite, what did influence look like for you then? Both how you used it and how you received it.
Well, I feel like I was blessed, and again, it's all based on the experiences that, that I have been through, to be open to influence. And again, like we were talking about earlier, I'll never know everything about anything. So being, on the list of my strengths with Strength Finders, it's learner.
Right.
So from that perspective, I'm always hungry to be able to learn something more, whether it's about myself, whatever it may be about. So from that standpoint, there were so many people that stepped into my life that I respected, and sometimes it was just because of, who I knew that they were by title. Sometimes it's because I knew of who they were as a person. And just a quick example, really what got me into the corporate world, because I didn't travel the, kind of prescribed, stereotypical, regular path.
You didn't start in the mailroom?
No, I started delivering drugs, as you know. 2 different lanes of doing that, but anyway, a whole nother story. But because of where I think God put some things in my path, I had the opportunity for one of the times that I drove by and happened to stop at university, that I had the opportunity to meet and work with people who were founders of companies. My hometown, Wichita, Kansas, is where Pizza Hut was founded. It's been in Dallas here for a number of years. A lot of people think, this is where it all happened, but it was actually in Wichita. Coleman Outdoor Products was founded in Wichita. It's now based, because it's owned, by a kind of a consortium out of Dallas here as well, ironically.
They followed you.
Yeah, right. They followed me. Actually, I did come down here first. But anyway, Learjet, Cessna Aircraft, Rent-A-Center, on and on. So all of these people, leaders and executives, were working with the university. And so I got exposed to them. And the whole point of this is, looking to them with respect because of, like I said, in some cases who they were, but also for what they had done, building.
Their accomplishments.
Yeah, exactly. Building successful organizations and so on. So I didn't graduate from college because I, got so involved in an opportunity actually with Pizza Hut that I was traveling and wasn't able to attend school. I actually had a professor that told me one time, you'll never get the opportunity again in business likely to do this. So do this because you can always come back to school.
You can always finish the degree.
Yeah, exactly. So 63 years old now, and I never finished college.
Wow.
But the whole point, again, is what I found was, and this kind of ties into our overall theme, I think, that it was truly the building of relationships with people of influence that became mentors directly or indirectly in some cases, but because I was looking to learn and be able to figure out how I could serve them, that they were more than willing to open doors for me. So in building those relationships, being open to learn and be kind of subservient to them from that aspect, and then giving them the respect is where they said, okay, this kid has something, and so I'm willing to reach out and open a door for him with someone who I respect. And so that's how it all came to be. So going from Pizza Hut, moving down here to Dallas with a startup company with some former EDS executives. One of them was Russ Bro's personal assistant back in the day, graduated from the military academy, and some of these kind of highly successful people from an education perspective as well as business, and what business do I have being involved with them. But it came down to the relationship and my desire to learn, my desire to grow, help them grow, whatever the case. And was with Tandy for a while, 10 years with Fidelity Investments, Levi Strauss, and a few others in between.
And so sounds to me like what you're saying is relationships over education tend to create opportunity.
Right.
And so the influence that both the organization had on you and that you had on the people of power, the decision makers, had a lot to do with authority and respect as well. If you didn't respect them and demonstrate that respect to them in the way that you spoke to them, and the way that you carried yourself, and the way that you dressed, and the way that you engaged in their environment, then they probably would have simply left you out of that environment. And at the same time, if they didn't have the authority, both the name brand and the respect up and respect down, the authority up and the authority down, they wouldn't have had an influence in your life.
Right.
You wouldn't have listened, per se. You wouldn't have listened to anything they had to say if they hadn't proven their success, if their brands weren't strong, their name wasn't strong. So now we've moved into influence, and I think from influence, we gain the opportunity to impact. Influencing people's lives, whether it's through education or it's through relationships. And another reason that I look at social media versus organizations and say, there's so much more influence in a in a organization than there is in social media, because you have face-to-face, knee-to-knee mentoring and relationships. You get to rub off the rough edges. You get to sharpen yourself a little bit better. You get people to give you immediate feedback that's honest and sincere, as opposed to a lot of what you see on social media, where you either only hear from the detractors or you only hear from the fans, and it's almost like we filter those out and then thrive on one versus the other. Where in an organization where you have person-to-person relationships, you're influenced by people negatively as much as you are positively, influenced by their thoughts and their opinions on a regular basis, but you get to kind of suss them out and not just take them at face value. But, okay, so I understand that person doesn't like the way I do this, but the reason is X, Y, Z, so do I give that a lot of merit or do I not? When we talk about impact, it's hard to measure in a lot of cases. We've both been, I think this is year number 9 at Trojan Talk, working with the high school students at Trinity. And so that means we've seen 3 complete sets of brand new students and graduates, and we've seen them walk through that entire cycle. And many of them we may never see again. We may never cross paths again. But I know for me, and I suspect for you, that our hope is that something we've said, something we've done, something we've challenged them to do will be not just influence in the way they make a decision, but we have permanent impact in their life, a place that will always come back to, like a foundational rock, and go, I remember when that happened. What are some other places in the corporate world, in the relationships that you have right now, that you have a proven pathway to leave an impact in somebody's life?
Well, so kind of going back to the question that you asked just before this one, because I think they really tie in together. I don't know that I was necessarily intentionally trying to create an impact, but what I saw was the dysfunction, if you will, organizationally, and looking at what did I have control over versus not, and so just kind of
asks all 4 of those questions, doesn't it? Where do I have authority?
Right.
Where do people respect me, and who do I respect? What influence do I have? So,
right.
How can I make an impact?
Well, so this is where I was often looked at as kind of a maverick, and maybe not having the proper respect, or maybe political respect. Yeah, exactly. Was that because I'm a learner, I'm always challenging, not only myself, but I'm challenging most of all the thing that I actually despise is the status quo, right? Because the status quo never changes. It's kind of go with the flow.
Right.
And I just...
You're so soft-spoken, nobody would ever see you as a rebel.
Well, we can go back to some earlier stories where I wasn't so soft-spoken. But again, I think that's a situation where, over time and based on influence of certain people, that I learned, and it took that practice, it took failure to recognize that I could be more influential, I could be more impactful by having more of a calm demeanor. And honestly, that's probably the biggest reason that I get hired today by clients, sports world or corporate or otherwise, is that I always tell people I'm unflappable and I'm unoffendable. And I think I demonstrate that on a consistent basis.
I need to work on that second one. Unoffendable.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, again, it's just based on, my overall experience and whatnot that's come to be.
I had conversations with Dr. Leaf, and she said recently, listen, no one can give you offense. You can only take it.
Right.
It's the only way to get it.
Absolutely.
I'm like, wow, that's pretty profound.
Right, it is. And part of it, not to regurgitate really here, but part of it is that I always try to look at a person, why are they projecting this? What is going on? And I may not know, right? I may never know. But again, I'm kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt that something is brewing inside of them to cause them to say or do something that a lot of people would take offense to. But to me, I try and have that perspective that something is causing that they, aren't necessarily intending to offend me or, to create discord.
And that's another one of those things that, back to the very beginning of our conversation, that has to become a trained response
Right.
over time and discipline through maturity, that how you respond to people who, and there are those who try to cause offense because that's how they get their jollies,
Right.
just to push your buttons and pull your cords, but to have the trained response that says, this is how I will always react in that environment, and this is how, and this is why, and this is my intent behind it, and this is what I expect to learn from it, so that becomes the second nature.
Right. So to, really address the question that you've asked, what I kind of picked up over time was that most people, it didn't matter whether they were executives or anyone, within the organization, essentially showed up to punch a clock. I mean, even athletes from that standpoint,
That's scary.
conceptually, right? Well, I mean, you think about some of our pro athletes today. They get paid, millions, hundreds of millions now. But they're essentially kind of just doing what they have to because they've, been blessed with talent and have merged that with some skill to where they're...
So whatever the parameters of success that cause the next incentive to kick in, how many times I catch the ball versus drop the ball, how many yards I gain after the catch, or how many times I win the Masters, that determines my ultimate paycheck, and that's the driver.
Right. But when I present them, when I, have the opportunity as a client, or even if they were, working in my part of the organization when I was in corporate, how would it feel if you knew that you were intentionally creating a memorable experience for someone? So even as an athlete, I am not running this race. I am not, running downfield.
It's not about the touchdown and the bonus points after that.
It's the experience that I am giving my teammates, the experience that I'm giving my coaches, the experience that I'm trying to give every fan in the stadium. And when I focus on that, as opposed to what's in it for me, then what's in it for me just becomes exceptional because I'm trying to do it for the others, right? And so it just really changes the mindset. So even in the corporate world, again, with other leaders that reported to me, executives or whatever, you have a title. And let's say you're my director of finance. That is just a title, it's a role. And you're coming in, basically, making some pretty good coin, but you're coming in at 8 o'clock in the morning and, let's say 5 o'clock. Now, we know that's not true for most executives in the corporate world today, but part of that becomes from, again, not taking leadership for yourself and setting some boundaries, which we could get into Henry Cloud and all of that if we wanted to. But anyway, the point is changing their mindset by giving them nuggets to think about. And that is, what if you looked at your role as if you owned the company? So if you're my director of finance, you own a company that provides financial services into this organization. And for me to ask you to come back tomorrow, it's going to be based on what you do today. And not just checking the boxes, but being creative and determining how you can add value, right? So
what you're, just to make sure that I'm following you, what you're really talking about is kind of an employee review done daily.
Correct.
Even if it's just mentally and internally.
Right.
If I were my boss, would I want to hire me again tomorrow?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so to give some legs to that, what is it that you're doing, as I said earlier, today to become a better person for tomorrow? So what are you looking at as far as personal growth goes? What are you looking at with regard to spiritual growth? And then what are you looking at to further develop your skills, right? And so when you look at your role as owning your organization and recognizing the only way your organization is going to continue to grow and develop and expand your opportunities as the owner, then you have to become better every day. And it's not a have to, but it's a want to. Because it again is creating an experience, because when you start doing that and start demonstrating that, again, being able to impact, being able to influence, and having these same expectations of the people in your organization, right? And then it's expanding it out too from, if you're in finance, it's being able to go out and share with all of the other business functions in the organization what it is that you and your organization can actually do for them, instead of waiting for them to come to you, or just by default, the other business functions that are reliant upon, the finance department, right? So what I started to see was that it really did start to change their mindsets. And they did start to have more joy in what it was that they were doing. And,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and so it became more impactful. And again, not
Externally
just,
and internally.
Exactly. Now, I used to get flack from, some of my peers or even superiors in some cases. You're just training people to lead this organization. And my position was, if we don't have something for that person to grow into, then
you're right. When they
Yeah.
expand as a person,
Right.
they're going to want to go to the next
but
level.
what's better than
And I think we both probably left jobs for that reason.
Yeah.
There was no upward mobility. We reached the cap.
Exactly. But what better for this organization if they leave and move on to something else, but because of the experience that they had here, and we just didn't have something yet for them to grow into, then, wherever they land, they had a great experience, and they're going to take what they learned and inject it into that new organization. But because of all that experience, they have nothing but good things to say. They expand our marketing department by default.
And I think it was from the book Talent is Never Enough. And I can't remember who the original quote was, but it was that kind of a contrast, similar to your question. What if we train all these people and they become great and then they leave? And the other one said, what if we don't train them and they become horrible and they stay?
Right.
And there really is that dichotomy. It's very seldom that you get, the mediocre people that are out hunting for another job, because once they've got that security and they're able to punch that clock and get that guaranteed paycheck. I think the fascinating thing to add on to what you said too is that, without saying it, you've said kind of my definition of vision is that it's got to be significantly impacting others' nobility.
Right.
Meaning, if your greatest why is my paycheck, then once you get a paycheck, you're done, you fail, and you quit. Or you quit first and then you fail. If your greatest why is even in that first realm of, well, I want a bigger paycheck so my wife can have this new car, so my kids can go to this school, so my kids can have a college degree, you're still not more than one separation or one degree of separation away from your own selfishness. And so if your why is selfishness, you're going to lose.
Right.
But it's when you go 3, 4, 5, 6 layers out, and you say, my why is that 40-year-old who's, we both have a friend, mutual friend, Craig Duswalt, who's doing everything he can right now to get to that Super Bowl, because the Chiefs have been his team forever and ever and ever, and this may be their first one ever.
Right.
But
It's actually their second. They were in Super Bowl 5,
yeah.
right? And I remember that because I'm from Kansas.
you were there.
Yeah. I wasn't at the Super Bowl, but I was in the neighborhood.
But them winning the Super Bowl, I mean, Mahomes obviously is going to have a nice little paycheck if that happens. That's awesome for him. The team has seen great growth. It's been coached well. All of those things are awesome. But it's our friend sitting in the stadium with his sons and his wife having the experience of a lifetime that very few people have a chance. That's what the players on the team should be playing for, not the touchdown bonus, not the MVP bonus, not the Pro Bowl, not the accolades and the Hall of Fame. Those should be the gravy at the end, or the icing on the cake, of saying, I set out to do this, and I've done that,
Right.
and that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and I think, one of the best examples is who we lost yesterday in Kobe Bryant. from the perspective and going back to all the things that we've talked about, but the intention, the discipline, the wanting to continue to learn and grow, whether it's learning multiple languages, whether it's basketball or whatever. Most people recognize him for being one of the best basketball players to ever play the game. But that's really a side effect of his way of how he lived his life. It was that that discipline, that intention, the practice that made permanent, because it wasn't just basketball. He went on after basketball in these few short years since then to win an Academy Award. He's written books, and he's continued to give back by coaching and inspiring young people. But if you look at it from a framework perspective, it's all in the same framework. Right.
Well, and it's that old phrase that we've used 1,000 times: how you do anything is how you do everything.
Exactly.
And so when that becomes a part of your second nature, a part of your character, that discipline and that diligence to really expand yourself, your wishes, your wants, your dreams, your goals, your whys,
right,
until they envelop as many people as possible. When John Maxwell decided, and I was on the call last week when he made the announcement that all organizations were coming under one. One of the things he said was, in less than 10 years, we've built a team of 30,000 coaches who are influencing people all over the world. We have 100+ countries that we've either influenced or we're on the way to by request. They've asked us to come and do this. We have a goal of 100,000 coaches over the next 10 years and 1 million people touched directly by those coaches where they've had impact in their lives. If John Maxwell said, I'm doing this because I want a bigger paycheck, I'm doing this because I haven't sold enough books, I'm doing this because, then the whole thing is a failure.
right,
It's the million people, it's the 10 million people, it's the 100 million people, it's the changing of the faces of nations when they're impacted by leadership that's based on good moral values and strong foundation. That's the point of impact.
right,
And the story that comes out of that, the stories of transformation, the countries that are flat out changed and they go, this is how that happened, this is when that happened. Mandela has a story. Mandela's life is a story, and it's a story of everything that we've talked about: authority, bucking authority and sitting in jail, but demonstrating authority to millions of people who said, at this moment in time, they may be the ones with the badges and the titles, but he's the one who's right, and that's different. And that earned him a lot of respect, which gave him a lot of influence and a lot of impact that even today is being felt long after he's gone.
sure,
And the story that we tell about him cannot be completed without all of those aspects.
right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's, just one thing I want to tie back with Kobe. I mean, he wasn't a perfect person, right? So he had some challenges.
Didn't he have an affair at one point?
Well, yeah,
Years
supposedly,
ago?
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, he was human too. So just to recognize that we all, have challenges, and again, some of those experiences that, but even with that, I'm sure that molded how he, moved on from there and, continued his life and, becoming hopefully a better spouse, a better husband, a better father for his daughters and so on. So, and again, that kind of goes back to where people can look at a situation like that, and you and I know people who have been on both sides of that. That can basically destroy my life from that point on. Once it became, out there in the news, so to speak, in his case, or I can look at that as I made a catastrophic mistake, but what can I learn from that? How can I course correct to become better? And again, for all of the rest of us, to give someone that grace to be able to recover, to be open-minded by not being offended by what someone has done. And we all know, from a Christian perspective that, a sin has no weight. A sin is a sin. So for us to, judge someone else, to become offended by, some behavior that he supposedly conducted, is where I think we can just kind of fall off the tracks.
And that impacts the story that we write and the story that we tell
Exactly.
about ourselves. And you're either transformed by those events to become a better person, as the example with Kobe and with many others. Tiger Woods is back on his game, but man, it ate him up for a while. Changed his marital status, changed his relationship with his spouse, and it was a publicly expressed moment of humiliation from a bad decision made.
Right.
To use a basketball term, which you're much better at than I am, I play golf better than I play basketball, believe it or not. I was kicked off the team in the 7th grade. Then I'll give you a clue. They actually told me, "Don't come back to basketball, but we really want to see you in football next year." So, but the term pivot was always explained to us by our coach, who was quite a player. He said, you pivot when you reach the point where your dribbling has come to an end. Because you can't start over again. That's a double dribble. That's a foul. But if you stop and you stand still when your dribbling has come to an end, whether you're in the right place or not, when you stop, you're done. You might as well just hand it to the opponent. But if you can learn to manage the ball and pivot, you have 1,000 new options. You might find a shot. You might find a defender to throw it off of. You might find a pass to get rid of it. But when you pivot, it's because you've come to a stopping point and you've got to plant yourself and look for options. And I think when you look at the great people who somewhere in their life came to a stopping point, a devastation that they went, I can quit now. Or I can find a way to recover. Kobe, Tiger, the list goes on and on and on. The ability to pivot, or like you said earlier, change your perspective. Take a breath, back up. I've met an impasse, now what? Or as Scott Schilling's book, that sucks. What now?
Right.
The ability to pivot in that moment and not just give up, not just quit, not just hand the ball over, but to allow life to move on, perhaps in a completely different direction. That is essential in the transformation of becoming the bigger us, the larger why, the greater impact, the more influence, and being respected and holding authority.
Yeah. Well, and I think using that example, how do we optimize that pivot? And I think so many people, to use your analogy, dribble down the court, and then they're stopped, and they don't know what their options are. And so again, they react to what seems to be the first available option, but may not be the best or the optimized option.
Right.
So kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier, which yes, absolutely, number one is vision. And that is, before I even come down the court, before I even, have the ball passed to me or whatever, I am creating situational awareness for myself. What is going on? What do I know, about that person or that situation and how they may react or respond,
Right.
Based on where the ball is or based on who's guarding them or an opportunity that they may see to go to the basket, all of those things. And kind of going back to, much earlier in our conversation, what you were describing is, in sports vernacular, is oftentimes referred to as flow, right? So by being able to see the court and, as Wayne Gretzky actually said, not seeing the puck, but seeing where the puck will be, right? That anticipation, get ahead of the game. And, it's based on experience, but as much as anything, it's also based on, that preparation, that practice that becomes permanent of seeing the whole picture and seeing the various ways that things may play out. And so when you get to that pivot point, whether it's in a basketball game or in life, you're not having to react. You're not having to actually hit that brick wall, because you've seen all of the potential options, and instantaneously, like you said a few minutes ago, you can make the best choice or the better choice or an optimized choice. But it comes back to having that vision, right, and then being prepared by that consistent practice that needs to become permanent in a positive, effective way.
Well, and that goes back to your beginning too. If you don't have a mentor who can help you identify the things you've got to correct,
Right.
then the best you can hope for is to continue to practice the wrong thing it's just going to give you the wrong outcome to begin with.
Sure.
Right? If you got the right input and the wrong reaction, or you got the right input and no reaction, or you got the wrong input and no reaction, then you're just going to get a bad output every single time. So whatever the input is, you've got to be able to be responsible for how you respond to it.
Right.
But the better your input, the more likely your output is going to be productive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to kind of tie that in and just going back half a step as well to what we were talking about earlier as far as that impact goes. And, you know, with our relationship, you know, I'm a baby follower of Jesus and, you know, in perspective to my overall life. So I really didn't know what I was doing corporately, but now as I look back, you know, that impact, trying to create that impact for people to enjoy what they did more and to have more ownership, which is absolutely critical. You know, to me, now I was doing my part to expand the kingdom, right? And so, you know, I think in all the things that we do, even going back to where I was talking about, what am I doing if I'm an athlete? To create that memorable experience for my teammates, for my coaches, for the fans. It's a way of expanding the kingdom based on how I'm expressing and delivering myself.
And I heard a phrase the other day that we've all heard 1,000 times, and my wife and I were kind of laughing about it. The birds of a feather flock together.
Right.
Ducks have feathers, and chickens have feathers, and pigeons have feathers, and eagles have feathers. They don't all flock together just because they have feathers.
Right.
Ducks flock with ducks, and pigeons with pigeons most of the time.
Well, and as we've heard John Maxwell say as well, eagles hate ducks and ducks hate eagles.
And, you know, I had a great conversation right here with Keenan Williams, and, you know, he was a high school superstar football player, thought he was going on to college, had an injury. Time for a pivot point. He pivoted into gangs and drugs and ended up in prison. When he came out, though, he found his faith in prison. Another pivot point.
Right.
Denounced the games, had a lot of tattoos removed, you know, all that kind of stuff, and started a whole new life. And I asked him, I said, you know, now that you're working in the White House, and not working for the White House, but traveling there on a regular basis, how many of the people who knew you in football or knew you in gangs look at you now and celebrate your success versus how many are trying to pull you back into that culture? You see, you know, there are different ones who do, and they have different motives. And some of them are latching onto my ankle because they're expecting me to pull them up, and some are latching onto my ankle because they're trying to pull me down. And I said, well, you know, there's that story of the monkeys who get electrocuted climbing up the pole, and the other monkeys pull them down before they get to the top of the pole. And I think the intent of the heart is really the moral of that story that a lot of people overlook. Because it's easy to say, well, they're all crabs in a barrel. They don't want you to succeed. That's why they're pulling you down off the pole. But you have to ask yourself, is there a chance that monkey just didn't want you to be electrocuted? He cared enough about you that he believed the journey to success would hurt you. And so he'd rather you not be hurt.
Right.
Not that he didn't want you to have bananas, but he didn't want you to be hurt. And that's a whole different thing. But that goes back to that, who are you mentoring knee to knee?
Right.
How are you learning to read the intent of their heart? What is the perspective that they're bringing? Why did they say that? How do they feel about that? And it goes right back to your whole lesson on authority as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would love to spend more time, but we've spent a lot of time already, and I know you've got other things to do today. So maybe we'll reconvene at another time.
Sure.
That gives us a larger window. But I'd love to talk to people about your story. Tell them a little bit about what you're doing right now. I know you're doing stuff with the Adaptive Foundation, Adaptive Training, and I know you're doing stuff with a Christian healthcare company. And what else is on your plate these days?
Right. Well, the main thing, as you know, what I do to earn a living is you know, coaching, and again, you know, what I call actually my company, if you will, is Elite Fit Performance. One of the things that I didn't talk about is that to have that mental and emotional capability or fitness, as I use, you have to have the physical fitness. And so getting into the details of that. But, you know, again, working with, you know, executives in the C-suite, and athletes and actually coaches of athletes as well in the sports world. So that's what I do to earn a living, and am blessed, for the opportunity to work with some pretty interesting people from that standpoint. And then, just as, again, going back to those relationships, and I had the blessing of being able to give the last devotional at Ziegler headquarters for the decade about a month ago. And so what I was talking about was, the previous decade. What was the most important thing that happened to you during that time frame, and just giving pause for, people to really think. And, I shared from me, I became a Christian, follower of Jesus, right? That was the most significant thing. But what happened after that, excuse me, were the people that started to enter my path that I believe, God put there. And one person that really kind of started that whole domino effect was a guy who I think you know as well, Don Hicks.
Yep.
And one day at a networking thing that I'd gone to, didn't even know what networking really was at that point in time, he said, "Hey, have you heard of this organization called Wingman?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I'd love for you to come and meet me." And I won't go into all the details, but the dominoes are connecting the dots. He exposed me to Wingman, and through Wingman, other doors opened with individuals, with organizations, Ziegler, and then people that I've met at Ziegler, or who have come to me through Ziegler, have gotten into what you were mentioning, the Adaptive Training Foundation. So it's just, been amazing at how, God has worked to be able to, start those dominoes and keep them coming and so on. But the Adaptive Training Foundation is a nonprofit that was started about 5.5 years ago by a gentleman who I actually met at Wingman, who had retired recently from the NFL. After 5 years. Interesting story on his own. His name's David Vibora, and that's for another day. But kind of like the gentleman that you were talking about earlier, he was training athletes, primarily college seniors, to prepare for the NFL Combine in a gym in Dallas. And he was invited by a common friend of ours, a former Navy SEAL, Clint Bruce, where he met a gentleman by the name of Travis Mills. And Travis is one of the only living quad amputees. I think there are about 5.
Wow.
And David went up to him and said, "Hey man, what are you doing to get in shape?" And Travis is like, "I don't mean to offend you, but I don't have arms and legs. How would I go about doing that?" And David said, "Come to my gym and we'll figure it out." So that was the impetus, basically, that really started everything. So more veterans started finding out about it and the benefits. Now coming, full circle, 5.5 years later, we've just started 2 weeks ago, class 18. We take 15 people in each class. The classes are 9 weeks long. We do 4 classes a year. And the key is, well, actually there are 2. One is, when we show people who have physical challenges what they're capable of doing that traditional medicine or whatever, has registered in their mind that are their limitations, that they can far, outstrip those limitations, then it's like, wow. And it changes their whole mental dynamic. And then what they also experience, which is the other key, is the community. The tribe, as we call it. They see and, are working with other people who have challenges. They're different, but they're still physical challenges. And going back to what I was talking about earlier. It doesn't matter because we take civilians now as well and work with them. So Parkinson's disease, Guillain-Barré, spinal cord injury from car accident, amputation from motorcycle accidents, whatever the case. And they become part of the tribe by desire because they see that they're there to support one another.
And they want to be in that community.
And they want to be in that community. And we have a process, if you will, an event that we do twice in each class called a root meeting. And so kind of getting into the PTS, because even if you were in a car accident and have a spinal cord injury, that was a traumatic event in your life.
Yeah,
and you
it's
know,
a pivot.
Right, exactly. And you're suffering from it. You may not have recognized it, but we kind of help you get into that, help you peel that onion back. But in these root meetings, it's kind of a lock-in. And so all of the athletes and the trainers, you know, get in and we cut to the bone as a community, as a group. And, you know, emotional, mental, physical, down to the bone. Who are you and what's going on in your life? And when you start to share with one another at that level, and people come around you when you're boo-hooing in tears because of, you know, your pain, emotional, you know, physical, whatever the case may be, then again, that's where that tribe mentality, I've got your back.
In this journey of the 9 weeks, do you do that?
We do it the second week and then the seventh week. And so then, you know, not to get too far in the weeds, you all can, you know, look up the website. It's adaptivetrainingfoundation.org. But the key is that it's a nonprofit. The athletes, as we call them, again, whether they're veterans or civilians, never pay a penny to go through the program. And once they graduate, we take them on a week-long excursion where we call it redeploy. And in the winter months, we take them to Park City, Utah, or to Lake Tahoe to snowboard and ski. Some of them have never even done that or anything close to it because they didn't think they could, or if they had done it before, they still didn't think they could. In the summer months, we take them surfing and, you know, out on the water and that type of thing. Then when they come back, they are an alumni for life, basically. And so we have programs where they can come back and continue to train and work out and be with their tribe. And we have people come from around the country, and so they'll come back and visit, and they'll stay engaged as much as they possibly can. We have, you know, a Facebook page where, you know, we can do some of that as well. But none of them pay a penny for what they receive, and it's the physical, it's the mental. We get into mindfulness meditation. Every class period starts with 15 minutes of mindfulness and meditation, ends the same way. We get into healthy nutrition and how to really engage that for the long term. So it's kind of a holistic type of thing, but what we see is, you know, it not only changes the dynamic of the athlete, but it changes the dynamic of all of their relationships with their family, with their friends, with their community. And once again, the impact that has on the kingdom. And a little over a year ago, I started a Bible study that we have on Friday mornings at ATF headquarters. And just, you know, for people who, you know, want to be involved and you know, dive deeper. And I'm no pastor, but, you know, we just are raw and authentic, and we read scripture and talk about, you know, how that impacts us on a daily life, how we learn and grow from some of those things. Again, how, you know, we support one another in our spiritual walk wherever we may be. And we've had people that, have come through class and had to go back out to have, surgery in Florida or whatever, and we actually bring them up on FaceTime, for the Bible study, because
So
that's a
they can
way
participate in the
for they can,
community. Absolutely.
exactly. So it's just a incredibly powerful and inspirational environment. And I tell people all the time, I can talk about it all day long. You can go out on the website or YouTube and watch the videos, but until you walk through those doors and have the experience, and again, creating, opportunities for people to have an experience that they'll never forget. And really, without exception, in my involvement in over 4 years, being able to make that happen has been tremendous. So, go ahead.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being a part of what we're doing. If you guys get a chance, check out Adaptive Training Foundation. We'll have Jim back another time, and I know he's got pressing things to get done today. It happens when you're that influential and that impactful, and you have that kind of authority in people's lives. But Jim, thank you for being a part of what we're doing.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for being a part of the Servant Leader series and the Leading Leaders podcast, and I hope that has been an impactful thing in your life. Please press that subscribe button and share this with everybody you know. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Notice some of the most fascinating conversations you'll ever have. In fact, some of the most fascinating things that you'll learn are from unexpected conversations. Interviews that people have had in various environments have sometimes triggered a conversation offline that really opens up some new ideas. I'm sending out this invitation. Anybody who watches Leading Leaders Podcast, who either is or knows someone who is a leader in their own right, who's making an impact and adding value to people, I would love to have an opportunity just to chat with you about the possibility. Now, in the comments below this post, there will also be a link to go to the application for anyone who is in leadership to just kind of fill that out. Let's talk about why you feel like what you have to say would be of great benefit to this audience and to growing this audience, to growing influence for you and for Leading Leaders Podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, go to the comments, click on the link, and we would love to have a conversation with you. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.